She sank beneath the turbulent waves, blood mingling with the icy depths, honor-bound to die as a warrior. Yet, a stranger's hand shattered her fate, dragging her back to life. What she learns next will change everything she believed about war, honor, and even herself. The cerulean seas of Alexar 9 welcomed Nilarath as she descended deeper into their embrace. Streams of bioluminescent currents swirled around her, casting an ethereal glow across her ashen orange skin. Her silver-white hair drifted like spectral filaments in the water, dancing with the gentle pull of the current. The crushing pressure of the depths seemed almost comforting now, a final embrace before her journey to the ancestral waters. Nilara, as her comrades called her, had always known this moment would come. Every Athetheran warrior accepted death as the ultimate honor, the final sacrifice that would cement their place among the ancestors. The war code, passed down through countless generations, was clear. To die in battle was glorious. To survive defeat was shameful. "Commander Nilara, do you copy? Your vitals are fading!" Seren Talkor's voice crackled through her visor's comlink, strained with desperation. "Hold position! Rescue teams are en route to your sector!" Nilara didn't respond. There would be no rescue, no second chance. Her fighter had been shot down by Driok particle beams, and now she drifted among its wreckage, a warrior accepting her fate. The dual pistols still holstered at her sides and the ceremonial blade strapped to her thigh marked her as a guard pilot of distinction, though such honors seemed trivial now as blood clouded the water around her. 3 fractured ribs pierced her lungs with each labored breath. Her left femur had shattered on impact. The pain was excruciating, but she welcomed it. Pain was the final sensation that would carry her to the ancestors. Bubbles escaped her helmet as she exhaled, rising toward a surface she would never see again. Fragments of memories flickered across her consciousness. Standing as a child on Alexar 9's shoreline, feeling the warm spray against her face, completing her first solo flight mission, receiving her ceremonial blade from Fleet Commander Talara. These moments, once so significant, now seemed distant and dreamlike. "I die with honor," she whispered to herself, the words bubbling through the water filling her helmet. "I return to the ancestral waters." Yet, as darkness began to claim her vision, an unexpected thought surfaced, a flicker of doubt. Was there more she could have accomplished? More life to be lived? The thought was blasphemous by Athetheran standards, but in these final moments, she found herself unable to silence it. The darkness grew, and Nilara surrendered to it, feeling the weight of the ocean pressing her down, down into the eternal depths. This was the warrior's path. This was her destiny. Until it wasn't. A silhouette cut through the murky blue, a form so foreign and unexpected that Nilara's fading consciousness struggled to process it. A human in heavy tactical diving gear moved through the water with surprising grace, propelled by mechanical thrusters. The Earth Alliance markings on the suit were faded, but still recognizable. Before Nilara could react, strong arms wrapped around her waist. The human's actions were decisive, unhesitating. Despite her injuries, Nilara struggled against the grip, instinct and pride briefly overriding her weakness. "Leave me," she gurgled through the water filling her helmet, though she knew the human couldn't hear. The figure adjusted something on her suit, and suddenly, the water was being purged from her helmet. A sharp hiss of compressed air filled the space, and Nilara gasped reflexively, her damaged lungs screaming in protest. "Easy," came a calm, male voice through a newly established comlink. "I've patched into your suit's systems. You've got multiple fractures and internal bleeding. Stay still." As they began to ascend, Nilara found her voice. "I told myself I would die as my ancestors demanded," she rasped, each word a labor. "Why do you save me, human?" The man's reply was simple. "Because letting someone drown when I can help isn't in my nature." Rage washed over her, an emotion she hadn't expected in what should have been her final moments. This human had no right to interfere with her honorable passage. He couldn't understand what his mercy had cost her. "You robbed me of warrior's death," she hissed, blood speckling her lips. "You dishonor me." The human continued their ascent, seemingly unmoved by her protests. "Name's Elliot Drake," he said instead. "And we need to move faster. Driok homunculus drones are approaching your crash site." A ping from Drake's wrist console confirmed his warning. The Driok, their mutual enemy, had detected the commotion and were sending reconnaissance units to investigate. As they rose through pressure layers of the alien ocean, Nilara felt consciousness slipping away again. This time, however, it wasn't the peaceful surrender to ancestral waters she had prepared for. It was a chaotic, shameful darkness. She had chosen death. To live would be disgrace. The last thing she saw before blackness claimed her was the surface of the water growing closer. Sunlight fragmenting through the waves above. A sight she had never expected to see again. When consciousness returned, it arrived with the harsh reality of bright lights and antiseptic smells. Nilara's eyes fluttered open to find herself lying on a medical table, surrounded by the stark, utilitarian design of human technology. Pain radiated from every cell in her body, but she was unmistakably alive. The human, Drake, stood at a console nearby, studying readouts that presumably detailed her injuries. His diving suit had been replaced by simple, utilitarian clothes, dark pants, and a worn gray shirt that had seen better days. Now that she could see him clearly, Nilara noted his features. Weathered skin suggesting extensive space travel, dark hair cropped short in military fashion, and eyes that carried the weight of experiences beyond their apparent years. 3 fractured ribs, internal hemorrhaging, left femur crushed. He recited without looking up. "You shouldn't be conscious." Nilara attempted to sit upright, a snarl forming on her lips. Pain lanced through her torso, but she pushed through it. "I would rather not be. Your so-called mercy steals my rightful place among my ancestors." Drake finally turned to face her, his expression a mixture of exasperation and something softer, perhaps concern. "I saved a life, yours. It wasn't your choice. Now rest." "You understand nothing of honor," Nilara spat, though the effort left her breathless. She surveyed her surroundings, quickly assessing that they were aboard a small vessel, likely a repurposed Earth Alliance medical transport. The name, stenciled on a bulkhead, confirmed this. Nomad. For the first time, she noticed Drake's exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and tension held his jaw tight. He moved with the careful precision of someone running on stimulants rather than proper rest. "How long?" she asked, her tone marginally less hostile. "Since I pulled you out? 13 hours. You've been in and out." Drake approached, checking an intravenous line connected to her arm. "A Thetheran physiology isn't so different from human. Basic treatments are compatible." "You have medical training." "Former Alliance medic. Left service 3 years ago." His answers were clipped, efficient. Before Nilara could respond, an alert sounded from the ship's communication system. Drake moved quickly to the console, his posture stiffening as he read the incoming message. "Commander Vrek, Driok patrol vessel," came a harsh, mechanically translated voice. "Human vessel. Prepare for boarding. You harbor enemy soldier." Drake silenced the communication with a quick gesture. "They'll shoot us on sight if they find you," he said, turning back to Nilara. "We have minutes, not hours." Despite her injuries and the dishonor of her rescue, Nilara's tactical mind engaged immediately. "Power down all non-essential systems," she instructed. "Make them believe we're preparing to surrender." Drake raised an eyebrow but moved to comply. "And then initiate emergency descent into Alexar 9's ionosphere. The electrical disturbances will mask our signature. That's a hell of a risk with shields at half capacity, Drake pointed out, though his hands were already working the controls. Nilara managed a pained smile. Athetherans die, humans save. Perhaps we can compromise on reckless survival. Warning alarms shrieked as Drake executed Nilara's plan, angling the Nomad into a steep dive toward the planet's turbulent atmosphere. The vessel shuddered violently, protesting the sudden strain. Above them, the Driok frigate fired warning beams that scorched the space around them, raising the temperature of the Nomad's hull to dangerous levels. "Trust the oceans I once embraced," Nilara murmured, gripping the edge of the medical bed as the ship bucked and rolled. "Let them hide us now." Drake's hands flew across the controls, compensating for gravitational forces that threatened to tear the small vessel apart. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he fought to maintain their trajectory through the thickening atmosphere. "Shields at 38%, he announced tensely. Despite her condition, Nilara found herself leaning forward, analyzing their descent path. "Adjust port thrusters 7 degrees. There's a storm system that will provide additional cover." Drake glanced at her with newfound appreciation before making the adjustment. The Nomad banked sharply, disappearing into a massive cloud formation crackling with electrical energy. On their sensors, the Driok vessel's targeting systems lost their lock. "It worked," Drake said, the tension in his voice giving way to surprised relief. "They've broken pursuit." Nilara collapsed back onto the bed, the brief surge of adrenaline fading and leaving her acutely aware of her injuries once more. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had just used her combat knowledge to ensure her continued survival. The very thing her culture taught her to sacrifice. "I learned the value of death before I understood the value of life," she said quietly, more to herself than to Drake. He heard her anyway. "Maybe you've never been asked to choose." As the Nomad stabilized its flight path within Alexar 9's turbulent middle atmosphere, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Drake busied himself with rerouting power to the damaged shield generators, while Nilara stared at the ceiling, lost in thoughts that would have been considered heretical among her people. "There's a network of canyons on Terrace 3, Drake said eventually, breaking the silence. "We can hide there while I make repairs and you heal." "Terrace 3 is a wasteland," Nilara objected. "Exactly. No one will look for us there." Drake adjusted their course. "It's 2 days at sublight speeds. Can you manage?" The question carried an unfamiliar weight. He was asking if she could endure, if she would choose to fight for her life rather than surrender to her injuries. It was a choice no Athetheran warrior should need to make. Yet she found herself nodding. "I will manage." The journey to Terrace 3 passed in a blur of pain medication and fitful sleep for Nilara. Whenever she was conscious, she found Drake either at the controls or checking her medical status. He rarely slept, instead subsisting on stimulants and determination. Despite her cultural conditioning, Nilara found herself reluctantly impressed by his resilience. Their conversations were sparse but gradually shed the initial hostility. Drake explained that he had been surveying Alexar 9's oceans for medicinal compounds when he detected her fighter's crash. Nilara, in turn, shared limited details about the Athetheran-Driok conflict, a war that had raged for generations over territorial control of key planetary systems. As they approached Terrace 3, the Nomad's sensors detected a potential problem. "Driok Scout," Drake announced, studying the readings. "Probably running a standard patrol. But if they spot us..." Nilara struggled to sit up, her body protesting the movement. "Let me see." Drake helped her to the co-pilot seat, where she could view the sensor display. The small Driok vessel was following a predictable pattern, sweeping the edges of the canyon system they were headed toward. "They're using a standard Driok algorithm," Nilara observed. "I recognize the pattern." Drake raised an eyebrow. "You studied Driok patrol patterns." "Know your enemy as yourself," she quoted. "Overload your countermeasure drones. Make them think we're a much larger vessel. That'll give away our position, Drake objected. Precisely. But here, she pointed to a narrow gorge on the navigational display. The canyon walls are unstable. The Driok will follow standard pursuit protocol, firing proximity missiles to flush us out. Understanding dawned on Drake's face. The missile concussions could trigger a rock slide. Nilara nodded, a grim smile forming. A trap of their own making. The plan was desperate, but with the Nomad system still damaged from their atmospheric dive, options were limited. Drake programmed the countermeasure drones, then piloted the ship into the narrow canyon Nilara had indicated. Releasing countermeasures in 3, 2, 1, Drake activated the sequence. A dozen small drones burst from the Nomad's lateral ports, each emitting signals that mimicked a vessel many times their size. The effect was immediate. The Driok scout altered course, accelerating toward their position. They've detected us, Drake confirmed, hands steady on the controls as he guided the Nomad deeper into the canyon. Missile launch detected. The Driok proximity missiles streaked through the canyon, detonating against the walls rather than directly targeting the Nomad. Just as Nilara had predicted, the concussive force destabilized the already precarious rock formations. Hard to port, Nilara shouted, as massive boulders began to break free above them. Drake executed the maneuver, sending the Nomad into a side tunnel as the main canyon collapsed behind them. Through the rear view screen, they watched as the Driok scout was engulfed by the rock slide, its engine nacelles crushed beneath tons of crimson stone. Diverting all power to dorsal shields. Hold us in one piece, Drake called out, as smaller rocks bounced off their hull. The Nomad shuddered, but maintained structural integrity as they navigated the collapsing tunnel. When they finally emerged into a wider canyon, both Nilara and Drake were breathing heavily from the tension. For Nilara, something fundamental had shifted. She had fought not for glory or an honorable death, but for survival, hers and Drake's. The realization disturbed her deeply. We should find a place to land, Drake suggested, seemingly unaware of her internal conflict. Sensors show a plateau 2 kilometers ahead with sufficient cover. Nilara nodded absently, her mind still processing the implications of her actions. As an Athetheran warrior, she had been raised to seek death in battle, to view survival as secondary to honor. Yet in that moment of crisis, her instincts had driven her to preserve life rather than sacrifice it. The Nomad settled onto the dusty surface of a sheltered plateau, its landing struts adjusting to compensate for the uneven terrain. The harsh, desert environment of Terrace 3 stretched out around them, a landscape of towering crimson rock formations and barren expanses baked by twin suns. The ship needs at least 24 hours of repairs, Drake announced, powering down non-essential systems. And you need rest. Nilara didn't argue. Her injuries throbbed with renewed intensity after the adrenaline of their escape faded. She allowed Drake to help her back to the medical bay, where he administered another dose of pain medication. Why do you continue to help me? She asked, as drowsiness began to claim her. I am your enemy's enemy, nothing more. Drake checked her vital signs before answering. Maybe that's enough. But something in his expression suggested there was more to it. A personal code that transcended the political boundaries of their respective species. As sleep claimed her. Nilara wondered what experiences had shaped such a code, and why it resonated with something deep and unacknowledged within herself. The next day brought both recovery and revelation. Nilara awoke to find her pain had subsided to a dull ache, thanks to the regenerative compounds in Drake's medical supplies. Her fractured ribs had begun to knit, and while her leg remained immobilized, the internal bleeding had stopped. Drake had spent the night repairing the Nomad's most critical systems. When he returned to check on her, exhaustion was etched deeply into his features. There's a mining outpost a few hours from here, he said, studying a data tablet. Helio Station, neutral territory, Minimal security. We can get additional supplies and better medical equipment. Nilara nodded, then hesitated. You need rest before piloting again. Drake looked surprised at her concern but conceded the point. 4 hours. Then we move. While Drake slept, Nilara used the ship's systems to access information about Terrace 3 and Helio Station. The outpost was indeed classified as neutral territory, a place where species from across the sector conducted business without bringing their conflicts with them. Such places were rare but vital in a galaxy fractured by interspecies wars. 4 hours later, as promised, Drake returned to the cockpit, looking marginally more rested. The Nomad lifted off, skimming low over the canyon landscape to avoid detection by orbital scanners. Helio Station appeared on the horizon as the twin suns began to set, a collection of domed structures nestled against a massive cliff face. Mining equipment dotted the periphery, and small transport vessels were docked at a central hub. The station wasn't large, but it was well established, a testament to the valuable minerals that could be extracted from Terrace 3's otherwise inhospitable surface. I'll register as an independent trader, Drake explained as they approached. You should remain aboard until I can assess the situation. Nilara agreed, recognizing the risk her Athetheran features would pose in an open station. While Helio might be neutral, individual prejudices could still pose a threat. Drake returned 2 hours later with supplies, and, more surprisingly, a data chip which he inserted into the Nomad's central console, with unusual care. What is that? Nilara asked, noting his serious expression. Information, Drake replied cryptically. I made contact with an old Alliance informant stationed here. He's been tracking something I think you should see. The holographic display flickered to life, projecting complex financial records, shipping manifests, and communication logs into the air between them. Nilara stared at the data, initially confused by its significance. These are weapons transactions, she said slowly, recognizing equipment specifications in the manifests. Look closer at the recipients, Drake urged. Nilara's confusion turned to shock as she processed the information. The shipping logs detailed advanced weaponry being delivered to both Athetheran and Drayok forces, often the same weapon systems, merely calibrated for each species' technological interface. The Earth Consortium, Drake explained, pointing to the supplier information, has been arming both sides of your conflict for decades. They've engineered a perpetual war, one that generates constant demand for their products. Disbelief gave way to cold anger as Nilara scrolled through more evidence. All these generations, we fought believing our cause yet, we are pawns. A specific entry caught her attention, a delivery of miracle supplies to her own fleet during a particularly desperate campaign. The commanding officer who had accepted the shipment was listed as Commander Talara, her former superior, long presumed dead after a Drayok ambush. Talara lives, she whispered, the revelation hitting her like a physical blow. Drake nodded grimly. And she's not the only one who knows the truth. There's a coalition forming, species from across the sector who have discovered they're being manipulated by corporate interests. They call themselves the Vidian Coalition. Why share this with me? Nilara demanded, though she already suspected the answer. Because you have a choice now, Drake said simply. Die for a lie, or live for the truth. The stark phrasing struck Nilara to her core. Everything she had believed about honor, about the righteousness of the Athetheran cause, was now cast in shadow. The war code itself, the foundation of her society's values, seemed hollow in light of this manipulation. We should leave, she said finally. If your informant knows we're here, others might as well. Drake nodded, returning to the pilot's seat. The Vidian Coalition maintains a station. They call it the Starbridge. It's where representatives from all affected species meet to share intelligence and coordinate resistance. Can we reach it? With repairs and a careful flight path. Yes. Drake initiated the launch sequence. But we'd be committing to something beyond just survival. The consortium doesn't take kindly to whistleblowers. Nilara considered this as the Nomad, lifted off from Helio Station. The path before her had never been less clear. To return to the Aethetherans now, with this knowledge, would brand her a traitor. To join the Vidian coalition would mean abandoning everything she had been raised to believe. Yet a new understanding of honor was forming in her mind, one based not on dying gloriously for a cause, but on living truthfully despite the cost. Set course for the Starbridge, she said, her decision made. The journey to the Vidian Coalition's Starbridge station took 3 days at the Nomad's maximum sustainable speed. During that time, Nilara's physical recovery continued, aided by the improved medical supplies Drake had acquired at Helio Station. Her mental state, however, remained turbulent as she processed the revelations about the true nature of the war she had dedicated her life to. Drake respected her need for space, focusing on piloting and maintaining the ship's systems. When they did interact, their conversations had lost the earlier hostility, replaced by a wary alliance born of shared purpose. On the third day, as they approached the coordinates Drake had been given, Nilara joined him in the cockpit. Her leg was still weak, but she could walk without assistance now, a fact that seemed to please Drake more than it did her. "We're being hailed," Drake announced as a communication request pinged on the console. The view screen activated to reveal a human woman with stern features and calculating eyes. "Nomad. This is Starbridge Security. State your business." "Elena," Drake greeted her with familiarity. "Your informant at Helio Station sent us. We have additional evidence regarding Earth Consortium operations." The woman, Elena, studied them both, her gaze lingering on Nilara's distinctly Aethetheran features. "An interesting partnership," she observed dryly. "Approach Docking Bay 3. Security will escort you to decontamination." As the transmission ended, Nilara raised a questioning eyebrow at Drake. "Elena Christensen," he explained. "Ex-Alliance Intelligence. One of the first to uncover the Consortium's war profiteering. She's intense." "I noticed," Nilara replied dryly. The Starbridge came into view, a massive orbital structure unlike anything Nilara had seen before. It didn't adhere to any single species' architectural style, but instead seemed to incorporate elements from dozens of different civilizations. Its central hub extended into radiating arms, each connected to various docking modules. The entire station pulsed with bioluminescent lighting that reminded Nilara of Alexar 9's oceans. After docking and passing through a rigorous security screening, they were escorted through corridors filled with representatives of species from across the galaxy. Nilara noted the flags and insignias of dozens of worlds displayed throughout the station, a visual testament to how widespread the Consortium's manipulation had become. Their guide led them to a conference room where several individuals awaited them. Nilara froze in the doorway as she recognized one of them, an Aethetheran female with distinctive markings denoting high military rank. "Commander Talara," she breathed, instinctively straightening to attention despite her injuries. Talara's expression softened with recognition. "Guard Pilot Nilarath. We believed you lost in the Battle of Alexar 9. "I nearly was," Nilara replied, glancing at Drake. "Circumstances intervened." Also present in the room were a stern Drayok elder, introduced as Vekrin, Elena Christensen, 2 half-centaurians with shimmering exoskeletons, a reptiloid merchant whose scales gleamed with inlaid gemstones, and a silent, translucent being identified as a Shaytek observer from the Galactic Court. "The Coalition Council," Drake murmured to Nilara as they took seats at the circular table. Elena Christensen stood, her posture military precise. "Elliot Drake, formerly of Earth Alliance Medical Corps. You claim to have new evidence regarding consortium activities." Drake connected his data tablet to the room's holographic projector. "Financial records," shipping manifests, communication logs, all detailing consortium weapons sales to both Athetheran and Dreok forces, specifically engineered to prolong conflict. The holographic display came to life, showing complex charts, tracking the flow of weapons and funds. Dreok Elder Vecrin leaned forward, his crystalline eyes narrowing as he studied the data. These manifests match shipments our intelligence operatives flagged as suspicious, he acknowledged grudgingly. The timing of these deliveries is particularly damning, Commander Talara added. Each corresponds precisely with a moment when one side was on the verge of decisive victory. Nilara felt a cold certainty settling in her gut. They never wanted either side to win. A decisive victory would end their market. Elena nodded grimly. Precisely. The consortium has been employing this strategy across multiple conflicts for decades. The evidence suggests they've manipulated at least 17 interspecies wars in the past century alone. But why reveal this now? Asked one of the half-Centaurians, their voice musical despite the serious question. What changed? All eyes turned to Nilara and Drake. It was Nilara who answered, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. I was raised to believe that the highest honor was to die in battle, to sacrifice myself for the Athetheran cause. I nearly achieved that honor during the last Dreok offensive. She gestured to Drake. This human denied me that death, and in doing so, opened my eyes to a greater truth. She recounted her near-death experience, her rescue, and their subsequent journey. As she spoke, she found herself revealing not just the events, but the profound shift in her understanding of honor and purpose. I believed our war was about territorial sovereignty, about protecting Athetheran worlds from Dreok aggression. She concluded. To learn that we have been puppets in a corporate profit scheme, it changes everything. The council chamber fell silent as her words resonated. Even the stoic Dreok Elder seemed affected, his crystalline features reflecting the holographic data that damned his people's cause as thoroughly as the Athetherans. It was the reptiloid merchant who broke the silence. Courageous testimony, he acknowledged, his forked tongue flicking between scaled lips. But dangerous. The consortium has eliminated whistleblowers before. Which is why we must act decisively, Elena countered. This evidence, combined with what we've already gathered, could be enough to force a ceasefire and trigger a galactic regulatory investigation. My people will resist, Vecrin warned. The concept of being manipulated is deeply offensive to Dreok honor. As it is to Athetheran, Commander Talara agreed, surprising Nilara with her reasonableness. Yet honor built on deception is no honor at all. Debate erupted around the table. Athetheran traditionalists, patched in via secure communication, bristled at the public humiliation such revelations would bring. Dreok hardliners accused Nilara of treason against all warrior species. Human delegates warned of corporate retaliation if the evidence went public. Through it all, Nilara remained silent, watching the political maneuvering with new eyes. She had never considered herself a diplomat. Her role had always been clear: fight, kill, die with honor. Now she found herself thrust into a realm of moral ambiguity, where the path forward was obscured by competing interests and ancient prejudices. It was Drake who finally cut through the noise. While we debate semantics, people are dying, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an intensity that silenced the room. Right now, Athetheran and Dreok forces are killing each other over resources they could share, beliefs they could reconcile, territories neither truly needs, all to fill the consortium's coffers. His words hung in the air, simple but undeniable. Nilara found herself nodding in agreement, surprising herself with how completely her perspective had shifted in such a short time. What do you propose? Elena asked Drake. A simultaneous revelation, he replied. Present the evidence to both the Athetheran High Command and the Dreok Security Council at the same moment. Make it impossible for either side to ignore without losing face. Commander Talara considered this. It could work, but the messengers would need to be beyond reproach. Someone each side would be forced to listen to. All eyes turned to Nalara. No, she said immediately, understanding their intent. I am a disgraced guard pilot who failed to die properly. My people will not listen to me. You underestimate your value, Talara countered. Your lineage is impeccable. Your service record exemplary. That you live despite grievous injuries will be seen as the ancestors' intervention, if framed correctly. And I will accompany her, Drake added, surprising Nalara again. You? She questioned. My people barely tolerate humans in diplomatic settings. Drake smiled grimly. Exactly. The human who saved an Athetheran warrior, standing alongside her as she reveals a human corporation's betrayal. It makes a statement that transcends species. The plan took shape over the following hours. Nalara and Drake would travel to the Athetheran orbital citadel, above Alexar 9, while a separate team led by Commander Talara would approach the Driok fortress Drekar. They would coordinate their revelations to occur simultaneously, presenting the evidence in a manner that would force both military hierarchies to acknowledge the truth. As the council dispersed to prepare, Nalara found herself alone with Drake for the first time since arriving at the Starbridge. You didn't have to volunteer, she told him. This isn't your fight. Drake's expression was uncharacteristically vulnerable. 3 years ago, I hesitated during a rescue operation. A fellow medic died because I wasn't fast enough. I've been trying to outrun that failure ever since. He met her gaze directly. I'm not hesitating anymore. The simple confession surprised Nalara. It was the first truly personal information Drake had shared, and she recognized the significance of the gesture. They were no longer merely allies of convenience, but something more, companions bound by a shared purpose that transcended their respective species conflicts. Then we do this together, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of agreement she had observed. Drake clasped her hand, his grip firm but gentle. Together. The 5 days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Nalara underwent intensive physical therapy to accelerate her recovery, pushing herself beyond what even the medical staff thought possible. Drake worked with coalition technicians to compile the evidence into formats compatible with both Athetheran and Driok systems, ensuring that no technical glitches could undermine their presentation. Elena provided them with diplomatic credentials that would gain them entry to the Athetheran citadel, carefully crafted documents that identified Drake as an official Earth Alliance envoy and Nylara as his military liaison. The ruse wouldn't withstand deep scrutiny, but it only needed to get them through the initial security checkpoints. When the day of departure arrived, Nalara stood before a mirror in her quarters, studying her reflection with mixed emotions. Coalition tailors had provided her with traditional Athetheran ceremonial armor, modified to accommodate her still healing injuries. The elegantly curved plates gleamed with the distinctive iridescence that marked high-ranking warriors, and the insignia of her guard pilot status was prominently displayed. There was a gentle knock at her door. Drake entered, similarly transformed by his attire. A crisp, Alliance blue uniform with Vidian Coalition insignia subtly incorporated into the design. The formal clothing lent him an authority that his usual utilitarian garb had hidden. "Ready?" he asked simply. Nalara nodded, though, in truth, she had never felt less ready for anything in her life. They were about to challenge the foundation of a war that had defined her existence, a war that countless Athetherans had died, believing was just and necessary. The journey to Alexar 9 aboard a coalition diplomatic vessel was tense but uneventful. As they approached the Athetheran orbital citadel, Nalara felt a complex mixture of emotions: nostalgia for the place that had been her home, apprehension about their mission, and a strange sense of distance from her former self. The citadel's golden spires gleamed against the backdrop of space, a stark contrast to the ominous obsidian towers of the Driok fortress Drekar, barely visible as a distant silhouette on the opposite side of the planet. The Coalition vessel docked at a neutral platform, hovering equidistant between the two massive structures, a symbolic position that underscored their mission. "Remember," Drake said quietly as they prepared to disembark. "We only need to reach the High Command Chamber. Once there, the Coalition cyber team will establish the simultaneous broadcast link with Talara's team at Drekar." Nilara nodded, adjusting the ceremonial blade at her hip, a comforting weight despite the circumstances. "And if we're discovered before then?" Drake's smile was grim. "Then we improvise." Their credentials passed inspection at the initial security checkpoint, though the Athetheran guards eyed Drake with barely concealed suspicion. As they moved deeper into the citadel, Nilara felt increasingly exposed. Several times, she spotted former comrades who would certainly recognize her, but a combination of luck and strategic timing allowed them to avoid direct encounters. Until they didn't. "Guard pilot Nilarath." The incredulous voice halted them, just 2 corridors from the High Command Chamber. Nilara turned slowly to face War Counselor Sareth Cole, a senior military official known for his hardline stance against both Draox and humans. His expression shifted rapidly from shock to outrage as he registered not only Nilara's presence, but her human companion. "You were reported lost in battle," Cole said, his hand moving to the ceremonial weapon at his side. "Yet, here you stand, consorting with a human." Nilara straightened to her full height, summoning every ounce of Athetheran dignity she possessed. "War Counselor, I come bearing critical intelligence for the High Command. The human is an Alliance envoy escorting me." "An Alliance envoy would have announced his arrival through proper channels," Cole countered, his suspicion evident. "Guards!" 2 Athetheran security officers appeared immediately, weapons raised. Drake tensed beside Nilara, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. "War Counselor," she said, her voice taking on the formal cadence of Athetheran military protocol. "I invoke the right of ancestral hearing." The ancient protocol, rarely used but still technically in force, guaranteed any warrior of sufficient rank the right to address the High Command in times of crisis. Cole's eyes narrowed, but he couldn't deny the request without violating traditions older than his authority. "Very well," he conceded reluctantly, "but the human stays here under guard." Nilara exchanged a quick glance with Drake, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Their plan required adaptation, but the core objective remained achievable. "Agreed," she said, then added in a lower voice to Drake, "The broadcast link?" "Already established," he murmured back. "Proceed as planned." Escorted by Cole and the guards, Nilara entered the High Command Chamber, a vast circular room dominated by a holographic projection of Athetheran-controlled space. Around the projection stood the members of the Athetheran Senate, their ceremonial robes marking their status within the rigid hierarchy. Her entrance caused an immediate stir. Whispers rippled through the assembled officials as they recognized a warrior previously reported killed in action. Nilara ignored the murmurs, proceeding to the center of the chamber with measured steps that betrayed none of her apprehension. She raised her arm in the traditional Athetheran salute, the gesture silencing the Senate as effectively as a shout. For a moment, she stood frozen in the ritual pose, aware that elsewhere, Commander Talara was likely executing a similar maneuver before the Driok Security Council. "Honored representatives of the Athetheran people," Nilara began, her voice steady despite the gravity of her message. "Our ancestors taught that honor is earned through sacrifice. But in our sacrifice, we have blinded ourselves to a far graver betrayal, one that trades our children's blood for coin." Without warning, the holographic display shifted, replacing the star map with the financial records and shipping manifests Drake had compiled. Simultaneously, a secondary projection appeared, a live feed showing Commander Talara addressing the Driok Security Council with identical evidence. "What is this?" demanded an elder senator, rising from his seat in alarm. "The truth," Nilara replied simply. "For generations, we have fought the Driok, believing our cause was just. We have died by the thousands, honoring a conflict engineered not by territorial disputes or ideological differences, but by corporate greed. As data streams revealed bank ledgers, weapons shipments, and corrupt politicians, the initial outrage in the chamber gave way to stunned silence. War Counselor Cole attempted to interrupt, branding Nilara a traitor to her people, but his voice was drowned out by the growing murmurs of shock and dismay. On the parallel projection, the Driok Council was experiencing a similar revelation. Driok Overlord Kerjar scoffed at what he termed human interference, insisting the war was a matter of Driok honor and security. Yet, even his protests weakened as the evidence mounted. Nilara continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The Earth Consortium has armed both Athetherans and Draacs with nearly identical weapon systems, calibrated just differently enough to maintain the illusion of advantage. They have manipulated peace negotiations, assassinated moderate voices, and ensured that neither side ever gains enough superiority to end the conflict." She gestured to the projection showing Talara. "Commander Talara, long thought dead, has spent years gathering this evidence. I, too, should be dead. My fighter shot down over Elixir 9. Yet I stand before you because a human medic valued life over political boundaries." The simultaneous presentation continued, with Nilara and Talara alternating points of evidence. As the full scope of the deception became clear, the initial resistance in both chambers began to crumble under the weight of undeniable facts. When all the evidence had been presented, Nilara took a step forward, her gaze sweeping across the assembled senators. "If we continue this war, we only feed the world's parasites. Let us instead stand together, as warriors for peace." In the projection, Talara extended her hand toward the Driok Council. In the Athetheran chamber, Nilara mirrored the gesture. It was a symbolic reaching out, an offer of cooperation that transcended generations of hostility. For several tense moments, silence reigned in both chambers. Then, slowly, an elderly Athetheran senator rose from her seat. Her ceremonial robes marked her as one of the oldest and most respected members of the Senate. "I have lost 3 children and 7 grandchildren to this war," she said, her voice quavering with emotion. "If what you say is true, if their sacrifices were manipulated by corporate interests, then the true dishonor lies not in peace, but in continuing to fight." Similar sentiments began to emerge in the Driok Council, with younger members particularly vocal in their outrage at the manipulation. The tide was turning, though resistance remained from the most entrenched military leaders on both sides. It was at this critical juncture that the doors to the Athetheran chamber opened, and Elliot Drake strode in, escorted by Elena Christensen and a contingent of coalition representatives from various species. Their appearance, human, Driok, Centaurian, and others, all standing together, provided visual proof that cooperation was possible. Drake moved to Nilara's side, his presence a silent affirmation of her words. She felt a surge of gratitude for his steadfast support, for the journey that had brought them to this moment. "A partial ceasefire," announced the elder Athetheran senator after consulting with her colleagues. "Athetheran fleets will halt all offensive operations pending a full investigation of these claims." On the projection, a similar declaration came from the Driok Council, with patrols ordered to stand down from active engagement. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the first step toward ending a conflict that had consumed generations. As the chamber erupted in a mixture of debate, outrage, and cautious optimism, Nilara found herself momentarily overwhelmed. Drake's hand on her shoulder steadied her, a quiet reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. "Arrest warrants," Elena Christensen announced, stepping forward with a formal declaration. "The Galactic Court has issued warrants for key Earth Consortium executives. Financial regulators across 17 systems are freezing assets and launching investigations." The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of diplomatic activity. Nilara found herself appointed as a special envoy, a bridge-bearer between species, tasked with facilitating communication between formerly hostile forces. It was a ceremonial rank, but one that carried real authority in the emerging peace process. Drake, for his part, was offered a commission in the newly formed Interstellar Peacekeepers, a coalition initiative to maintain stability during the transition. He accepted with a quiet dignity that Nilara had come to recognize as characteristic of the man who had saved her life and, in doing so, potentially saved countless others. 3 weeks after their dramatic revelation, as negotiations continued and the first tentative steps toward lasting peace were taken, Nilara and Drake found themselves standing on Alexar 9's shore at dawn. The beach had once been a restricted military zone, but the ceasefire had opened it to civilian access for the first time in decades. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the sun's first rays spark on the waves, the same waves that had nearly claimed Nilara's life. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. "I used to think these waters would be my final resting place," she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "That my honor would be measured by how well I died in them." Drake nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "And now?" Nilara considered the question, feeling the weight of all that had changed. "Now, I believe honor lies not in how we die, but in how we live, in the truths we defend, and the lives we protect." She glanced down at her wrist, where a simple human Athetheran rosary now rested, a gift from Drake, symbolizing the bridge between their cultures. He, in turn, wore an Athetheran frost linen bracelet she had given him, its pale fibers catching the morning light. "The war isn't over," Drake reminded her, ever the pragmatist. "There will be resistance, attempts to return to the old ways." "Yes," Nilara agreed. "But now we fight with open eyes, not as pawns, but as architects of our own destiny." The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows behind them as they turned to face the day ahead. There would be challenges, setbacks, perhaps even renewed conflict. The Earth Consortium's influence ran deep, and generations of hatred could not be erased overnight. Yet as Nilara walked beside Drake toward the waiting shuttle that would return them to the Starbridge, she felt something she had never expected to find in the aftermath of her failed death: purpose. Not the purpose that had been assigned to her by tradition and the war code, but one she had chosen for herself. She had been raised to believe that a warrior's highest calling was to die with honor. Now she understood that the true challenge, the true test of courage, was to live with honor, to stand for truth, even when it meant challenging everything she had once believed. As the shuttle lifted off, carrying them back to the work that awaited, Nilara caught a final glimpse of Alexar 9's oceans through the viewport. Once, she had embraced those waters as her ancestral gate, a passage to an honorable end. Now she saw them differently, not as a destination, but as a beginning. The ocean that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her a new one, and with it, a chance to redefine what honor truly meant, not just for herself, but for generations of Athetherans and Draox to come. And that, she realized, was a cause worth living for.